The galaxy, vast and infinite, carried whispers of a name that would one day echo in terror across the stars. Mara Renfield. She wasn't a soldier, nor a ruler, just a human engineer assigned to a desolate mining colony on the remote planet Ferrot, a dust-covered wasteland under the iron control of the Galactic Confederation. But her journey would not stay ordinary for long. Mara arrived in the early evening, her shuttle landing amidst the howling desert winds. She was greeted with the lifeless stares of tired workers, human and alien alike, barely standing under the weight of oppressive labor. Another cog in the machine, she muttered under her breath, adjusting her tool belt and heading to her quarters. That night, as the others rested, a strange hum reached Mara's ears. It was faint, but persistent, drawing her out of the sleeping quarters into the pitch-black wilderness. You shouldn't be out here," called Draven, an older miner she had briefly met during her arrival. "There's nothing but danger in these sands." Mara hesitated but replied firmly, "There's something calling me. Can't you hear it?" Draven squinted, his expression a mix of confusion and unease. "Go back to bed. Nothing good comes from wandering where you don't belong." Ignoring his warning, Mara continued walking until she found herself at the entrance of a deep cavern. Her portable light flickered, struggling against the inky darkness. Something within her urged her forward. At the heart of the cavern lay a shimmering sphere, levitating silently, emitting pulses of golden light. It was beautiful and alien, a relic untouched by time or hands. Mara reached out, and the moment her fingers grazed its surface, her world erupted in blinding light. She awoke hours later, sprawled on the cavern floor, her body buzzing with an unfamiliar energy. Her veins felt electrified, her senses heightened. The cavern was silent now, the sphere gone as if it had never existed. Back at the camp, her transformation began. The other workers whispered about the way her eyes glowed faintly under the dim lights. Tools responded to her touch without her commanding them. Machinery hummed to life when she was near. "Renfield." Draven confronted her after witnessing her bend a heavy steel pipe with her bare hands. "What's happening to you?" I don't know," she stammered, fear and exhilaration coursing through her. "But I feel unstoppable." Word of Mara's abilities spread quickly, reaching the ears of the Confederation. Ferroth was not only a mining colony, it was a critical outpost for alien technology. The last thing the Confederation wanted was an anomaly disrupting their operations. 2 weeks later, a squad of elite enforcers descended on Ferroth. Their objective was clear: neutralize Mara Renfield before she could become a threat. As their ships landed, Mara stood on the cliffs overlooking the colony, her body radiating with power she still didn't fully understand. She had spent days experimenting, learning to manipulate the very fabric of reality around her. Rocks shifted under her gaze. Flames danced in her palm. Draven climbed up to her side. "They're coming for you, you know. You should run while you can." She turned to him, her expression calm but resolute. "Run? No. They want a fight. I'll give them one." The first blast came from the soldiers below, a warning shot meant to intimidate. Mara raised her hand, and the energy projectile froze mid-air before disintegrating into harmless sparks. The enforcers hesitated. Mara smiled. "Your move," she said, her voice carrying across the canyon, and with that, the galaxy's most infamous war began. The enforcers moved swiftly, their precision a hallmark of the Confederation's elite forces. The air buzzed with tension as they surrounded the mining colony, their sleek exosuits gleaming under the twin suns of Ferrot. Mara stood at the edge of the canyon, her presence a beacon of defiance. "Renfield!" The squad commander's amplified voice echoed through the dust-laden air. "Surrender now. You've been classified as a Class 7 anomaly. Compliance ensures your survival." Mara smirked, her glowing eyes locking onto the commander. "Class 7? I guess I should be flattered. But you came all this way to fight, didn't you?" Her voice carried a dangerous edge, daring them to strike first. The first shot was fired, a concentrated plasma burst aimed directly at Mara. She raised her hand instinctively, and the energy dissipated upon contact, the blast fragmenting into a harmless display of light. Draven watched from behind a boulder, his heart pounding. He had never seen anything like this. "You don't have to do this," he shouted at Mara. "I didn't choose this," Mara replied, her voice calm but firm. "But I won't let them control me or anyone else." Her retaliation was swift. With a flick of her wrist, the ground beneath the enforcers trembled and cracked. A burst of kinetic energy erupted from her body, sending soldiers flying back into the canyon walls. The enforcers regrouped, deploying shields and advanced weaponry. Mara, now fully aware of her newfound powers, didn't wait for them to adjust. She leapt into the fray, her movements impossibly fast, weaving through their ranks with precision. As she fought, memories of the artifact flashed in her mind, its hum, its light, the way it had fused with her very being. She felt its energy coursing through her veins, amplifying with every moment of resistance. But something darker stirred within her. Each use of her power seemed to pull at her humanity, unraveling pieces of who she once was. "Renfield, stop this!" the commander yelled as she ripped apart a troop transport with a wave of her hand. "You're a danger to everyone, including yourself." Mara hesitated for the briefest moment. Could they be right? Was she losing control? The pause gave the enforcers their opening. A high-frequency suppression field enveloped her, designed to neutralize anomalies. She fell to her knees, her powers flickering. Draven, watching from his hiding spot, couldn't bear it. Against his better judgment, he sprinted toward her. "Mara, get up!" he shouted. Through gritted teeth, Mara forced herself to rise, her determination outweighing the suppression field's effects. With a scream of defiance, she shattered the field, sending shockwaves through the air. The enforcers, now battered and desperate, called for reinforcements. Mara, breathing heavily, turned to Draven. "You should go," she said, "and leave you here. Not a chance," he replied, though his voice trembled with fear. "They won't stop," Mara said, her tone somber. "Not until I'm dead, or until they are. Then what's the plan?" Mara glanced toward the horizon, where the Confederation's capital ships were already descending. Her eyes glowed brighter as she clenched her fists. "We make them regret underestimating us." The skies above Feroth turned crimson as Mara prepared for the next wave. The Confederation was relentless, but so was she. This was no longer a simple mission for survival. It was the beginning of something far greater, a war that would shake the foundations of the galaxy. The air crackled with tension as Confederation capital ships descended into Feroth's atmosphere, their hulls glinting like steel giants under the glaring twin suns. Mara stood at the heart of the shattered mining colony, her body humming with barely contained energy. Around her, the wreckage of the Enforcer's first wave smoldered, a warning to the next that dared to approach. Draven leaned against a boulder, clutching a rifle scavenged from a fallen soldier. His hands trembled, though he tried to hide it. "This is insane," he muttered, glancing at Mara. "You can't take on the Confederation alone." Mara's glowing eyes never left the horizon. "I don't intend to." Before Draven could respond, a low rumble shook the ground. From the belly of the largest capital ship, an imposing mech dropped to the surface, its impact sending a cloud of dust into the air. It towered over the battlefield, bristling with weapons designed to dismantle entire armies. The mech's pilot opened a channel, their voice cold and mechanical. "Renfield, your resistance ends here. Stand down, or I'll reduce this colony to ashes." Mara's lips curled into a defiant smile. "You'll have to get through me first." The mech fired first, unleashing a barrage of plasma bolts. Mara moved faster than seemed possible, weaving between the blasts, her body a blur of light and motion. With a sweeping gesture, she sent a shockwave toward the mech, but its energy shield absorbed the impact with ease. The battle raged on, each clash more devastating than the last. Mara's powers were immense, but the mech was a marvel of Confederation engineering, its pilot relentless. For every strike she landed, the mech countered with devastating precision, forcing her to push her abilities further than ever before. Meanwhile, Draven scrambled to help the other miners evacuate. The workers, mostly unarmed and terrified, clustered in the shadows of the colony's crumbling infrastructure. "What the hell are we supposed to do?" one of them shouted. Draven hoisted his rifle. "We fight if we have to, but for now, stay low and get to the tunnels." Above them, the mech's plasma cannon roared, sending a searing beam toward Mara. She deflected it with a shimmering barrier of light, but the strain showed on her face. "Mara!" Draven called out. "We can't hold them off forever." She didn't respond. Her focus was entirely on the battle, on the mech that was now pressing its advantage. It lunged forward, its massive arm swinging like a battering ram. Mara caught the blow with both hands, her feet skidding across the ground from the force, and then, for a moment, everything went still. The mech's pilot spoke again, their voice cutting through the silence. "You're strong, Renfield, but you can't win. Even your powers have limits." Mara stared up at the machine, her breathing ragged, but her eyes burned brighter, and her voice carried an edge of steel. "Then I'll go beyond them." She unleashed a torrent of energy, a blinding wave that engulfed the mech entirely. The air itself seemed to shatter under the force, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. When the light faded, the mech stood crippled, its armor scorched, and its systems sparking with damage. The victory was brief. Above them, dozens more Confederation ships emerged from hyperspace, their silhouettes blotting out the stars. Mara's heart sank. No matter how powerful she was, the Confederation's resources were endless. Draven, now standing beside her, followed her gaze to the sky. What now? Mara clenched her fists, determination hardening her features. "We send a message." "To who?" "To everyone," she said, turning toward the colony's central comms tower. "The galaxy deserves to know what's happening here. And if they come for me, they better be ready to fight for it." As Draven watched her ascend the tower, his fear began to shift into something else. Hope. The galaxy would soon hear her voice. And for Mara Renfield, this was only the beginning. The comms tower loomed over the colony, its antenna stretching high into Ferroth's crimson sky. Mara climbed swiftly, the metallic ladder groaning under her grip. Each step sent a faint pulse of energy rippling through the structure, a testament to the power surging within her. Below, Draven and the surviving miners scrambled to fortify the colony's perimeter, their fear mingling with a spark of newfound resistance. "Are you sure this will work?" Draven shouted, his voice barely audible over the rising wind. Mara paused at the top of the tower, glancing down at him. "It has to. They need to see what's happening here. They need to know we won't just bow." At the apex of the tower, Mara accessed the colony's communication array. The interface flickered to life at her touch, the system seeming to respond to her presence as if it recognized her authority. She adjusted the frequency, her fingers moving with mechanical precision, and broadcasted her message across every open channel. "This is Mara Renfield," her voice rang out, clear and commanding. "To the Confederation and all who live under its control. Ferroth stands in defiance. We are no longer pawns in your endless games of power. If you come for us, know this, your oppression ends here." The words reverberated across the galaxy, reaching the ears of smugglers, freedom fighters, and rulers alike. Far from Ferroth, in the pristine chambers of the Confederation's Central Council, Mara's transmission played on an expansive holoscreen. The council members, a mix of humans and alien dignitaries, sat in tense silence as her image filled the room. "She's dangerous," one of them hissed, their elongated features contorted in anger. "More than we anticipated." "She's inspiring rebellion," another countered, their voice sharp with concern. "If this spreads, It could destabilize the entire system. The council's leader, a stoic figure clad in ceremonial armor, rose slowly. "Then she must be silenced," he declared, his tone devoid of emotion. "Deploy the Nemesis fleet." Back on Feroth, Mara descended the comms tower as the first signs of the Confederation's retaliation came into view. Dozens of capital ships emerged from hyperspace, their hulking forms eclipsing the horizon. From their underbellies, swarms of smaller fighters poured forth, their engines glowing like angry fireflies. Draven met her at the base of the tower, his face pale but resolute. "So, what's the plan now?" Mara scanned the sky, her eyes narrowing. "We hold the line, for as long as we can." The miners, armed with scavenged weapons and the remnants of destroyed enforcer equipment, took their positions. Their fear was palpable, but Mara's presence seemed to ignite a determination they hadn't felt in years. "You've done enough," Draven shouted as Mara prepared to step forward toward the incoming swarm. "You can't fight them all." Mara turned to him, her voice steady. "I didn't start this to run. If I can hold them off, even for a moment, it gives you a chance to live, a chance to fight." Draven's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Then don't you dare fall." The first wave of fighters descended, unleashing a barrage of plasma fire. Mara moved like lightning, her powers manifesting in dazzling displays of energy. Shields of shimmering light deflected the blasts, while precise bursts of kinetic force tore the ships from the sky. The ground shook as larger dropships landed, disgorging heavily armored enforcers. Mara met them head-on, her movements a blur as she dismantled their ranks with impossible strength and speed. Yet as with every enemy she felled, more poured in to take their place. Above, the Nemesis fleet's flagship hung like a harbinger of doom. Its commander, a veteran of countless battles, watched the chaos unfold with a grim expression. "She's holding," his lieutenant said, disbelief coloring his tone. "For now," the commander replied. "Prepare the Eviscerator." The Eviscerator was the Confederation's most destructive weapon, a beam capable of obliterating entire cities in a single strike. If deployed, it would reduce Feroth and everyone on it to ash. On the battlefield, Mara began to falter. Though her powers burned brighter with each use, she could feel the toll it was taking. Her breathing was labored, her limbs heavy. Still, she fought, determined to protect the colony for as long as she could. Draven, seeing her struggle, rallied the miners to push back against the advancing forces. "She's fighting for us," he shouted. "We fight for her." His words spurred the miners into action, their desperation transforming into fierce resolve. Plasma bolts flew, crude traps were sprung, and for a brief moment it seemed they might hold their ground. But above them, the flagship's weapon systems began to charge. The sky turned a blinding white as the Eviscerator prepared to fire. Mara looked up, her heart sinking. She could feel the weapon's energy, its devastating power aimed directly at them. "This is it," she whispered to herself. But then something stirred deep within her. The energy she had been wielding, the force that had fused with her, pulsed stronger than ever before. It called to her, urging her to go further, to reach deeper. Draven's voice cut through the chaos. "Mara, what are you doing?" She turned to him, her eyes glowing with an intensity that seemed almost inhuman. "Ending this." Mara raised her hands, and the battlefield was engulfed in light. The light emanating from Mara was blinding, engulfing the battlefield in a radiance that halted both friend and foe. The miners shielded their eyes, and the advancing Confederation forces paused in their assault, momentarily awestruck by the display of raw power. On the flagship of the Nemesis fleet, the commander watched through his viewport, his face darkened with both awe and dread. "What is she doing?" the lieutenant asked, his voice trembling. "She's not just fighting," the commander said, his tone grim. "She's transcending." Mara stood at the epicenter of the light, her body humming with an energy that felt limitless, yet dangerous. It clawed at her mind, whispering promises of power at a cost she couldn't fully comprehend. She focused on the looming flagship above, its superweapon charging to fire the eviscerator beam. "You want to destroy us," Mara said softly, her voice carrying unnaturally across the battlefield. "Then let's see if you can handle this." She thrust her arms upward, and the ground beneath her cracked as a torrent of energy erupted into the sky. The beam struck the flagship's shields with such force that the protective barrier flickered and buckled, unable to withstand the assault. The commander braced himself against the control panel as the ship trembled violently. "Redirect power to the shields!" he barked, but it was too late. Mara's attack pierced through the defenses, tearing into the ship's hull and causing a catastrophic explosion in its midsection. As the flagship began to descend in flames, Mara dropped to one knee, her breath ragged. She could feel the toll of the energy she wielded. It wasn't just draining her body, it was unraveling something deeper, something vital. Draven ran to her, his voice frantic. "Mara, stop! You've done enough." She shook her head, her eyes glowing faintly. "They're not stopping, Draven. I have to keep going." "No, you don't!" he shouted, grabbing her shoulders. "Look around you. You've already shown them we can fight back. If you keep pushing like this, you'll destroy yourself." Mara looked at him, her resolve faltering for the first time. She glanced at the battlefield, where the miners were holding their own against the remnants of the Confederation forces. Her actions had inspired them, given them the courage to stand, but above them, more ships were descending, and the Eviscerator's energy buildup hadn't stopped. The flagship, though damaged, was still operational. Its remaining systems focused solely on firing the devastating weapon. Inside the flagship, the commander gritted his teeth, his focus unshaken despite the chaos around him. "She's powerful, but she's reckless," he said, steadying himself as the ship's systems struggled to stay online. "If we can hold for another minute, the Eviscerator will fire, and it won't matter how strong she is." On the surface, Mara rose shakily to her feet, her body trembling with exhaustion. Draven placed a hand on her arm. "There has to be another way," he pleaded. "There's no time," she replied, her voice soft but resolute. "I started this fight, and I'll finish it." Without waiting for a response, Mara launched herself into the air, soaring toward the flagship. The miners below watched in stunned silence as she ascended, her form glowing like a star. Draven's heart sank. He knew there was no turning back now. Inside the flagship's command center, alarms blared as Mara breached the hull, tearing through metal and machinery with raw force. The crew scattered, powerless to stop her as she made her way to the core of the Eviscerator. The weapon's energy buildup was nearly complete, the chamber bathed in a blinding blue glow. Mara stood before it, feeling the immense power that rivaled even her own. "This is the last thing you'll ever fire," she muttered, placing her hands on the core. The energy surged through her, overwhelming and agonizing. Her scream echoed through the flagship as she absorbed the weapon's power, redirecting it back into the core. The machinery around her began to overload, sparks flying as the weapon spiraled toward a critical meltdown. Outside, the flagship erupted in a massive explosion, the shockwave rippling across the battlefield. Mara fell from the wreckage, her body engulfed in light as she plummeted toward the ground. Draven and the miners ran to where she landed, finding her lying motionless amidst the smoldering debris. Draven dropped to his knees beside her, his voice shaking. "Mara, and please get up." Her eyes fluttered open, faintly glowing, but her body was weak, nearly lifeless. "Did we win?" she whispered. Draven nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Yeah, Mara, we won?" She smiled faintly, her gaze drifting to the sky. The remaining Confederation ships were retreating, their forces broken and scattered. But Mara knew the fight wasn't truly over. As the miners gathered around her, their expressions a mix of awe and grief, Mara struggled to her feet. She looked at them, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is just the beginning. They'll be back, stronger than ever. But so will we." Draven placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll follow you, Mara, wherever this leads." Mara's glowing eyes dimmed slightly as she nodded. "Then let's make sure it leads somewhere worth fighting for." Above the planet, the Confederation's fleet vanished into hyperspace, but their defeat would not go unanswered. Mara Renfield's name would spread across the galaxy, a rallying cry for the oppressed and a warning to their oppressors. And though her body was battered and her spirit tested, Mara knew one thing for certain: the war for freedom had only just begun. The days following the battle on Feroth were a blur of rebuilding and reflection. The miners, once broken under the Confederation's oppressive rule, now moved with purpose and determination. They patched their settlement, scavenged usable materials from the wreckage, and fortified their defenses. But at the center of it all was Mara Renfield, a figure both revered and feared. She sat in the shadow of the comms tower, her hands trembling as she held a worn piece of metal debris. Her once vibrant glow had faded, leaving her pale and fragile. The power she wielded had taken more than just her strength. It had chipped away at her humanity, leaving her unsure of how much of herself remained. Draven approached, his rifle slung over his shoulder, and crouched beside her. "You've been quiet," he said. "I'm tired," Mara replied, her voice hollow. He sighed, leaning against the tower. "I get it. But the galaxy's buzzing with your name. People are calling you a hero." Mara scoffed, shaking her head. "A hero? Heroes don't feel like this. They don't doubt what they're doing." Draven placed a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe that's what makes you the kind of hero we need. You don't just want to win, you want to make it mean something." Meanwhile, the Confederation Council convened in a heavily fortified chamber on their capital world. The mood was grim. Reports of Mara's broadcast had reached every corner of the galaxy, igniting uprisings on multiple colonies. Entire fleets were being diverted to quell the unrest. "She's fractured our control," one council member said, slamming their fist on the table. "We can't allow this rebellion to spread." "We need a solution," another added, "something definitive." The council's leader, silent until now, raised a hand. "We don't need a solution. We need her, alive." The room fell silent. "Her power is unlike anything we've ever seen," the leader continued. "If we can harness it, the Confederation's dominance will be absolute. Send the trackers. Bring her to me." Back on Feroth, Mara stood before the miners, her frailty hidden beneath a mask of determination. The air was thick with tension as they awaited her words. "The Confederation will come back," she began, her voice steady. "And when they do, they won't just want to destroy us, they'll want to break the hope we've built here." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "They think this is just about me," Mara continued, "but it's about all of us. Every colony they've crushed, every voice they've silenced. If we stand together, we can show them they're wrong." Draven stepped forward. "What's the plan, Mara?" She hesitated, the weight of leadership pressing heavily on her shoulders. "We prepare, we protect Feroth, and we reach out to the others who are fighting back. This war won't be won alone." Weeks passed, and Feroth transformed. The miners, now fighters, trained relentlessly. Smugglers and resistance groups arrived in secret, bringing weapons, supplies, and their own stories of defiance. Mara's broadcast had done more than inspire. It had united. But Mara herself grew increasingly withdrawn. The power within her, though quiet for now, stirred restlessly, its whispers growing louder. She feared what it might make her become. Draven found her one night, staring at the stars from a makeshift observation post. "You can't keep carrying this alone," he said. She didn't look at him. "I don't have a choice." "You do," he insisted. "Let us help you. Let me help you." Mara turned to him, her glowing eyes tinged with sadness. "What if I become something worse than them, Draven? What if I lose myself completely? Then we'll bring you back, he said firmly. That's what we're fighting for, isn't it? To be more than what they've tried to make us. For the first time in days, Mara smiled faintly. The final blow came faster than expected. A fleet of stealth ships descended on Feroth, bypassing its new defenses with terrifying precision. Confederation trackers, clad in black armor and armed with experimental technology, infiltrated the colony under cover of night. Their goal was not to destroy, but to capture. The battle was swift and brutal. Mara fought alongside her people, her powers flaring once more, but the trackers were prepared. They wielded nullifying devices that sapped her strength, forcing her to retreat deeper into the colony. Draven found her in the comms tower, where she was frantically adjusting the broadcast equipment. "They're here for me," she said, her voice strained. "I have to go." "You're not going anywhere alone," he replied, raising his rifle. "They'll kill everyone here to get to me," Mara insisted. "If I leave, I can draw them away." Draven hesitated, his face a storm of emotions. Finally, he nodded. "Then we'll make sure they don't catch you." Mara's final broadcast went out just as the trackers breached the tower. "To everyone who hears this," she said, her voice calm despite the chaos around her, "remember that they fear us because we're stronger together. Feroth will fall, but this isn't the end. Keep fighting! Don't let them win!" As the trackers stormed the room, Draven stepped between them and Mara, his weapon blazing. "Go!" he shouted. Mara hesitated for a moment before leaping through the shattered window, her powers carrying her far from the colony. She looked back only once, the fires of Feroth burning brightly in the distance. The Confederation declared Feroth neutralized, but the spark it ignited spread like wildfire. Across the galaxy, resistance movements rose, united under Mara Renfield's name. And Mara herself, she vanished into the stars, a fugitive and a symbol, determined to fight until the galaxy was free, even if it meant losing herself in the process. Her journey was far from over, it had only just begun.